Welcome to Video Aided Instructions Upgrade Your Writing series. This is the first program in the series called Prewriting. Let me ask you a question. When do you start writing? Well, that's easy. You start writing when you start writing the first sentence. Well, actually, no. Research has shown that writing starts long before you actually write that first sentence. It starts when you plan your writing. We call this pre-writing. It's the series of decisions that you make as you actually think about your writing. Pre-writing has a number of steps to it. One of those steps is considering the assignment, what you have to write about. Another one of those steps is thinking about your audience, the people who will read your writing. Third one is your purpose. That's your reason for writing. And the last one is gathering your ideas. We call that brainstorming. Learning the steps in this process can help you write much more easily and much more successfully. It's not very difficult to do, and in this lesson, you'll learn all about it. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and list the 4 steps in pre-writing. Then come back. Use this model. Pre-writing includes considering, and the 4th item. Here are the answers. Number 1 is considering the assignment. Number 2 is considering your audience. Remember the importance of audience. Number 3 is considering your purpose. Purpose is your reason for writing. Remember there are 4 purposes. And number 4 is brainstorming ideas. Let's start with the assignment. There are 2 things that are going to happen. Either you're going to have an assignment or you're going to have to make up your own. Let's assume the teacher has given you an assignment. In these cases, you must answer that question, not any other question. You must directly address what you've been asked to do. Let me give you some examples of that. First, let's say the assignment is choose a favorite family food, such as lasagna, tacos, or wontons. In an essay, tell the reader how to make that dish. Well, in this instance, what you're doing is you're giving steps in a specific order, from first to last. So the first step might be gathering the ingredients, the second step might be browning the meat, and so on and so on and so on until you get to the last step of the process, which, as we all know, is enjoying the meal. Second assignment. Why did Brutus's speech in defense of killing Julius Caesar fail? Well, in this case, you've got to go back to Shakespeare's play. And to persuade your readers that your opinion is correct, you've got to give specific examples from that play. So you might quote lines, you might refer to scenes, and you would then use that textual proof to make your point. Third one, choose a place that you've always wanted to visit. Tell your reader all about that place. Well, in this case, what you're doing is you're describing the place. So you would gather a lot of details about the place, and those details would help your readers understand why you want to visit that place. Here's the 4th one. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. Well, this is clearly a story. You would start the story with this sentence. Here, what you would do is you would tell a story that would include characters, plot, setting, dialogue, and theme. So let's review for a moment. What you've done is you've taken a look at the assignment, you've analyzed the assignment, and you've figured out what it is that you must do as you plan or pre-write this assignment. Now, what happens when you're given a very broad subject rather than a specific assignment? Well, in this case, What you've got to do is narrow that very broad generalization into a specific topic. So you might get something like health or music or the Electoral College, the Civil War, a famous scientist, foreign policy. You know you can't write an essay on that because the topic is much too big. So what you do is you narrow it down to fulfill the limitations of your paper. Most junior high, high school, and college papers run between 350 and 500 words. That's the amount that you're expected to write between 45 minutes and about an hour. So now you want to narrow that topic down to something that you can express in 350 to 500 words. So let's say your topic is computers. We can narrow that down to, are computers being overemphasized in school? Or we can narrow that down to a how-to paper, perhaps how to build your own computer. Or we could narrow that down to a descriptive paper, how computers have made our lives better. Those aren't the only ways that you can do it, of course, because you would consider your purpose and your audience, as we mentioned in the beginning. Let's say your topic is animal rights. You might write about a persuasive paper, are zoos cruel rather than educational? Or you might write about the importance of testing certain pharmaceuticals on animals before they're tested on humans. Or you might write a story. You might write about how your cat has more rights than you do. And you would pick the one that would best suit your purpose and your audience. Say your topic is for history. You're writing about the Civil War. Well, you can't write about the Civil War. It's much too large. So what you might do instead is narrow that down to the purpose of the Civil War. You might argue that the Civil War was more about states' rights than it was about enslaved people. Or you might argue about the causes of the Civil War in a mechanical sense. You might say that the cotton gin helped bring about the Civil War. Let's say your topic is sports. You might pick a favorite sport like soccer and discuss why soccer is becoming so popular in America. Or you might write a story about when you were part of the winning soccer game. You could make up anything that would suit your purpose and your audience, as long as it was narrow enough that you could do it within about 45 minutes to an hour. Let's say you're back in history class or social studies and you've got to write about voting. Maybe the Electoral College, how the Electoral College works. That would be a how-to paper. Or the importance of getting young people to vote and to become involved in their civic responsibility. Or maybe you'd write a story about the first time that you became aware of voting and maybe you went into a voting booth with one of your parents. How about healthcare? That's a big topic now. Maybe you could argue about the government should spend more money for healthcare. Or you might want to tell a story about getting a very bad cold and having difficulty recovering from it. Or you could talk about how the government should increase funding for rare or so-called orphan diseases. And another good argumentative paper might be school should be held year-round. You should go to school all the time and not have summer off. Or maybe a story about the first day of school and what you remember from being 5 years old. You get the idea. What you're doing now is you're taking a very broad, general topic that's too big for a paper, and you're narrowing it down to suit your audience and your time and your purpose. Now, what happens if you're not even given a broad, general topic? What happens if your teacher just says to you, well, write? In that case, you've got to start with your own ideas and what interests you. Think about the kind of stuff you like to read, for example. If you find the topic interesting, chances are you'll write about it with more detail, and your audience will find it more interesting as well. Furthermore, you'll know a lot more about it because you've read about it extensively. So you'll be less tense about the writing because you'll have more details and examples to draw on. And this will make the writing easier and more fun as well as more interesting. Now, topics really do matter. as I'm sure you've realized by now, because a good topic can make your paper very interesting, but an unsuitable topic can make your paper not so interesting. How can you tell if a topic is unsuitable? Well, first of all, you can't write about it in the time that you've been given. It's just too big. Second of all, it's very boring, or it's been written about so much that nobody really much cares about it. Third, you don't know enough about it and you don't have time to do the research to learn about it. And four, the topic is inappropriate or offensive or even vulgar. And in that case, your audience is going to be turned off in the very beginning. So here you are, you're sitting there in class and you're racking your brains and you see the clock ticking away. You've got to find a topic and you've got to decide if it's suitable. Here's a checklist that you can use. Keep this in your head the next time you're faced with a topic. First of all, is my topic too limited? Is it too narrow? Sometimes you're so excited about the topic that you make it so narrow that you don't have enough to write about. Well, in these cases, what you've got to do is make it just a little bit broader so that you can get about a page or a page and a half double-spaced. Number two, maybe it's the opposite. Your topic is still much too broad. You think you've narrowed it sufficiently, but you're really not quite there yet. Think about how this topic is expressed in literature. If other writers need an entire book about this topic, chances are that it's just too big for you to do in a paper, in a class period, or even in an evening. Number three, what happens if your topic is too technical? You may not have the background to discuss it. In this case, throw the topic out and start again. Unless you have the background to write about it, it's not going to come out very well. You'll do a lot of vague generalities rather than specific details. You don't have the time to teach yourself nuclear physics or calculus or how to fly a helicopter. So pick a topic that's not too technical. What about topics that are sort of yesterday's news? If everybody knows everything about your topic, chances are no one's going to want to read it. I've been teaching a long time and I get a lot of papers that I've read over and over and over again. And frankly, the minute I see gun control or a topic about raising the driving age or lowering the drinking age, I go, been there, done that, and I'm already bored with it. Now, the writer knows this because I've said to them, don't do this anymore, but still I get those topics. So think about a topic that's a little bit fresh and hasn't been done to death. Next, what happens if your topic is a little bit too controversial? You're afraid that you might offend your audience because it's something that they might not agree with your opinion. In this case, don't take the risk. Pick a topic that suits your audience and yourself. Papers that shock and offend take unnecessary risks. Next, do I really like my topic enough to write a paper about it? Maybe your teacher likes your topic, and your parents like your topic, your buddies like your topic, even your dog likes your topic, but you don't like your topic. If you don't like your topic, don't write about it, because there won't be any enthusiasm behind it, and it'll come out a little bit forced. Pick something, if you have the option to do so, that you really enjoy writing about. So now, what I would like you to do is to pause the program and identify the following as subjects of essays or topics of essays. Remember to distinguish between the two, subjects and topics. Explain why you made the decisions that you did. Then come back. Here are the answers. Number one is a subject. Alternative fuels is too broad to be a topic. You could take alternative fuels and you could write an entire book, maybe even a series of books on this particular subject. And because it is so broad, you know it's a subject and not a topic. Number two, Henry Ford's development of the assembly line resulted in the mass production of cars. Well, that's a topic because that's narrow enough for you to write a paper on. It's just enough there for you to get into some real substance, but not too much that you've got to develop a whole series of essays and books and even an encyclopedia on the topic. Number 3, America's legal system. Well, that's a huge, huge subject. America's legal system is the subject of many, many volumes and many websites. So that would be a subject. Number 4, America needs a flat tax. That's relatively narrow, so you know that that's a topic. And that would be a good topic to use as an essay. Number 5, butterflies. Clearly a subject because it's enormous. There are so many, many different kinds of butterflies and so many things that you could say about butterflies. You could describe their migration patterns, you could describe how they look, you could describe their processes of gathering nourishment. So that's so broad that that would be a subject. And number 6, is intelligence determined by nature or by nurture? That's relatively narrow, so that would be a topic. And that would be an interesting topic to use for a paper. So now, what I would like you to do is to pause the program and choose the reason why each of the following topics is unsatisfactory. Choose from the list of reasons that follows. Here are the reasons. Number 1, they're too broad and cannot be completed within the time allocated. In other words, they're just too large. Number 2, they're boring or they're written about too often. As a result, your audience won't find them particularly interesting. And number 3, they're unfamiliar, so you can't write about them knowledgeably. You don't know enough about them, and it would be very difficult and time-consuming for you to find the information that you need. So again, number 1, they're too broad. Number 2, they're boring. And number 3, they're unfamiliar. Then come back. Here are the answers. Number 1, the major poets, painters, and dramatists of the Renaissance. Well, this is far too broad. You can't complete this in the time allocated. This is enough subject matter for an entire semester or maybe even a year's worth of study. Just doing the poets alone could take you weeks and weeks and weeks, not to mention the painters and the dramatists. Remember, one of the dramatists of the Renaissance was William Shakespeare. And if you were to cover Shakespeare, you'd have to cover all of his plays, and there's 37 of them, and his poems, long and short. So this is clearly far too broad for the time that you have allocated. Number 2, America should lower the drinking age. The topic may seem fresh to you, but from the standpoint of an instructor, it's boring. It's been written about much too much. I personally have read probably about 100 papers about this, and there's really nothing that a writer can say at this point that I haven't read. Therefore, your paper will not be particularly interesting to your instructor, and you should avoid a topic like this and this particular topic. Number 3, there are many different theories to explain the disappearance of the dinosaurs. Well, those words, many different theories, tell you this is an extremely broad topic. You can't complete it within the time allocated. You might be able to discuss one theory, but you can't possibly discuss many theories. Therefore, this topic is far too big for the time you have. Number 4, America needs stronger gun control laws. This is very similar to number 2, America should lower the drinking age. It's boring. Many students have written about it. Many commentators have written about it. Many columnists have written about it. There won't be much, if anything, that you can say that your instructor has not read before. Therefore, avoid this topic because it's just been done far too much. And number 5, nanoscale trees improve efficiency in low-cost plastic solar cells. This one is probably unfamiliar to you, so you can't write about it knowledgeably. I personally don't know what a nanoscale tree is. I would have to do a lot of research. So unless you're an expert in this particular type of science, I would stay away from this topic because the amount of research that you're going to have to do will be excessive. So because it's just too technical and too unfamiliar. Now, let's talk about why these 5 topics would be suitable for a paper. Number 1, media producers should prosecute people who download copyrighted music. Well, first of all, you're going to find this topic very interesting, most likely, and your teacher will probably find it interesting as well. The topic is controversial. It has 2 sides. There are advantages to prosecuting people who download media. They are stealing stuff, but there are also disadvantages because you might be going after, let's say, a 5-year-old who's just taking a song. So you've got 2 sides. You can argue both. You can decide one side is stronger than the other. You can find information relatively easily. The odds are you've read about this in the newspapers, or you've read it on a web page, or you've seen it in a television show. So you can get enough information, and you probably feel strongly enough to have a little bit of passion in your paper. So this would be a good topic. Number 2, students should be placed in classes according to their academic ability, not their age. In most schools, students are placed in classes according to their age. So if you're 5 or 6, you'll be in kindergarten or 1st grade and so on. But maybe students should be placed in grades according to what they have learned. It's an unusual topic. There hasn't been a ton of stuff written on it, but there's enough stuff that you could find the information that you need. Also, your teacher hasn't read it over and over and over again, so she or he would find it interesting, and you would probably find it pretty interesting because it may not have been something that you've thought about a great deal. It's narrow enough to fit into your time frame, and it's broad enough that you can find enough information to write what you need. So this would be a very suitable topic as well. Number 3, why my father is my hero. Well, this could be your father, perhaps your mother, maybe an aunt or an uncle or a sibling, maybe a teacher. This is a good topic because it's sufficiently narrow. You're dealing with only one person, and you would know the person well enough that you would be able to do the research. So using this one, why my father is my hero, you might discuss 3 specific examples, 3 reasons why you admire your father. Your teacher would find that interesting because your teacher wouldn't know your father and would like to read something about an admirable person. You would find it interesting because you know this person very well and you can get sufficient detail. So this would suit because it's not too broad, it's not too narrow, it can be researched relatively easily, and it would be interesting for you and for your audience. Number 4, how to solve a quadratic equation. This one works extremely well because you've got a clear-cut process with steps. You can discuss step 1, you do this, step 2, you do this, step 3, you do this, step 4, you do that, and so on and so forth. It's broad enough that you've got enough to fill 350 to 500 words. It's narrow enough that you don't have to write an entire book on the process. There are clear-cut steps, so you have information that you can write about, and you know where to get that information. Either you know it from your math class, your math teacher, or you would look in your math book to find information. Number 5, golden retrievers are better pets than cocker spaniels. An excellent topic because you're comparing two similar things, two types of dogs, so they have similarities. But they also have differences because they are different breeds. That gives you a nice structure, similarities and differences. It also enables you to do some research, which you might do from personal experience. You might look at web pages. You might use books, perhaps, or magazines. And your reader would find it interesting because of your details. You would find it interesting because you would like to write about your pets. Later on, I'll show you some more ways to brainstorm topics so that that part of this process is easier for you. Now, let's talk about the people who are going to read your paper. We call them your audience. In most cases, you know your audience already. Your audience is your teacher. However, you may also have a number of different audiences. For example, your audience might be your classmates, because your teacher may decide that you will exchange papers and read each other's papers. Or your audience may be the entire class, as if, let's say, the teacher asks you to read your paper aloud, or the teacher posts the paper on the board. The audience could be even larger. The audience could be the entire school, or maybe even the entire community, because your paper may be part of a contest or part of a web page. So as you write, you're going to have to figure out who your audience and audiences are. We say that you have a primary audience and a secondary audience. Your primary audience are the main people who read your writing, and normally that's your teacher. But you may also have those secondary audiences, and that could be your classmates or your parents or people in the community. So before you write a single word, think about your audience and decide who will be reading your paper. Number 1, who is your primary audience? Number 2, what's their age? Will their age have an impact on the way they approach your work? For example, your classmates are going to know more about some topics than perhaps your teacher, and vice versa. So think about what they need to know about your topic. For example, a while ago, I got a paper from one of my students, and it was about a CD, and I didn't realize that DVDs and CDs had only one side. I thought you had to turn them over like records, so I was really embarrassed that I didn't know this part of the paper. The writer realized that later in a second draft and fixed that for me. So think about the age and think about the level of knowledge and experience. Also think about their gender. Are they male or are they female? Why are they reading your writing? Are they reading it to learn something? Are they reading it to be entertained? Are they reading it to be persuaded? Because that determines the details that you know as well. Perhaps most important are these last 2 qualities. How much do they already know about my topic? Are they experts or are they total newcomers? For example, I don't know a lot about sports. Actually, I don't know anything about sports. And when my students write about sports, they have to explain things like RBIs, because I don't know what an RBI is. And when I see those initials, they always put in parentheses whatever it is it stands for. Whereas if they were writing to somebody who knew a lot about sports, they wouldn't have to put that information in. And last, but certainly not least, how do they feel about your topic? Are they receptive to your topic or are they hostile to your topic? Are they somewhere in between? Do you have to persuade them a lot or are they already on your side? If you know their opinion of your topic, you can choose your details much more carefully. So let's review for a second. When you consider your audience, consider their age, their gender, their level of experience and information, and their feeling about your topic. Because of course you want to tailor your writing to suit your audience. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and identify the audience for each piece of writing. Remember, the audience are the people who are going to be reading your writing. Identify the secondary as well as the primary audiences. The primary audiences, recall, are the ones you are sure will read your writing, the person for whom you're writing specifically. Secondary audiences can be anybody else who would happen to read your writing. Then come back. Number one, an in-class essay. The primary audience is most likely your teacher. In nearly all cases, if you're writing in class, you're writing for your teacher or your instructor. However, the teacher may assign a secondary audience by having students peer review the paper. This is very common, especially in a first draft of an essay. So before the teacher grades it, he or she lets one or more students peer review it. Thus, always consider the possibility of both audiences when you write. Stuff that you may write for your teacher, you may not want to have your peers reading. So keep that in mind when you write an in-class essay, that there might be that secondary as well as primary audience. Number two, a college application essay. Well, obviously your primary audience is going to be the college application committee. These will be the people who sit around the table and read your essay along with your other application packet. It's unlikely that there's going to be a secondary audience. They're most likely not going to give it to any other committee because they are the final arbiters of whether or not your application suits their specific needs for admission. Now, before you submit that essay, you may want other people to read it and check it for you, but they're not your audience. They're simply people who are reviewing your work. Your audience is that college application committee. Number three, a class newspaper. Well, it's a class newspaper, so your primary audience will be your teachers and the other people in your class, your classmates. However, other classes, parents, and even the administration may read the newspaper as well. It's probably fairly likely that you're going to bring a copy home to show people in your house. The teacher may take a copy, post it on a bulletin board outside the door. Anybody walking by can see it. They would be your secondary audience. So your primary, the people within the class, but you have a very, very wide secondary audience, all the other people who are likely to see a copy of this newspaper. Keep that in mind as you write it. Number four, a letter of complaint to a company. Sometimes you don't get the service that you require, or a product that you purchase isn't exactly what you thought it was. In that case, you're going to write a letter of complaint to the company. The primary audience will be the person to whom you address the letter, and you would find that perhaps on a website or on the product label. However, it's very likely that other people within the company are going to read that letter. They may be the people who produced the product, they may be somebody who served you in some capacity. These would be a secondary audience. With a letter of complaint, always assume that you're going to have a primary and a secondary audience. And it might be difficult for you to locate one specific person to whom to address your letter. So you might write, to whom it may concern. So in that case, you're going to have an unusually wide audience because the letter might get passed around within a department. Number five, a text message to a friend. Well, as you send a text message, you're assuming that your friend is going to be your primary audience because you're texting just to your friend. However, you can't be sure that your friend won't show the text message to someone else or even send it on to somebody else. Thus, always consider the possibility of a secondary audience when you text. Never assume that that message is going to be completely private because once it's on your phone, other people can see it as well. Number six, an essay on a standardized test. You know that you're taking a great many standardized tests, which is why it's important to upgrade your writing. The primary audience on a standardized test essay is the person who's scoring that essay. There's not likely to be a secondary audience. In most cases, one person will be scoring this. Maybe there'll be 2 or 3 people, but they will not pass this on to somebody else. This is not something like a class newspaper that people will be bringing home. So keep that one person, an adult, in mind as you write those essays. Number 7, your resume and your cover letter. Remember that a resume is a list of your qualifications for a specific job. A resume has your name and your address and your phone number. It has your education. It has any other relevant job experience. It's usually a one-page document. The cover letter goes with the resume. The cover letter explains why you are specifically suited for the position for which you are applying. So for example, if you're applying for a position as a counselor in a day camp, you might explain in your cover letter, even though it's listed in your resume, that you've been a babysitter for several years, or that you have a life-saving certificate, or that you've taken a CPR class. And that would explain why you are very qualified for this job in a day camp. The primary audience with a resume and a cover letter is the person who makes the actual decision whether or not to hire you. However, since there are usually many people involved in these decisions, you probably will have a secondary audience as well. So you might have seen an ad, let's say online or in a newspaper. You're sending this resume and cover letter to the person who runs the camp. That person may pass it off to an assistant counselor or someone else to take a look and say, I need a person here, I need a person there. So keep in mind both your secondary and your primary audiences every time you apply for a job. Number 8, a posting to a social web page. The primary audience, when it comes to a social web page, is everyone that you know who has access to the page, everyone that you've allowed, that you've listed, to access what you've posted. But there are usually many people who have access that you don't know of. So you've always got to assume an extremely wide secondary audience, because you might post it on your web page, someone might pick it up, post it on theirs, and send it on as an email to other people. With a social web page, always assume that the entire world has access to what you've written, because once you've posted that message, you cannot control where it goes. So don't post things to social web pages that you don't want everybody reading, because that information very often gets out further than you know. Why is your audience so important? Why have I gone over and over audience in this program? Well, the reason is audience determines everything about your writing task, and I mean everything. First of all, audience determines your topic. Earlier in this program, we talked about topics that your instructor or your teacher doesn't want to read because he or she has read them far, far too much. They're boring. So you're considering your audience before you choose a topic. A topic for a book for a child, for example, would be very different than a topic for a book for an adult. So for a child, you might retell a fairy tale or a fable. For an adult, you would discuss perhaps a more complex plot line involving more characters, more action, more conflict, more suspense, because an adult can handle more characters and more plot lines. The level of interest, the level of knowledge is determined by the individual. So what one person knows, another person might not. Therefore, when you're writing, you're going to have to say to yourself, gee, what does my reader know about this? How much do I have to explain about this? Because otherwise my reader's not going to understand what I'm talking about. Your audience also determines the words that you use. For example, the jargon or the specialized language of a certain field. Someone who's an engineer has a different set of words than someone who is a doctor, for example. And you would use the words used in that field. Children have a different level of diction than adults. You would use shorter, simpler, and more common words with young children. You would use perhaps longer, more complex, and more elevated diction with an older audience. Compare, for example, the diction in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence with the diction in a child's book. And you'll see there's a very different level of language because the audience is different. Your audience also determines how long your sentences are and what types of sentences you write. With a younger audience, you're going to use shorter sentences. With an older, more sophisticated audience, you could use longer sentences. Also, it depends on the topic. If you're writing about a more complex topic, you might use shorter sentences to make it easier for your audience to understand. You might use compound, complex sentences with one audience, but only simple sentences with one independent clause with another audience. Your audience also determines the length of your document. When you're writing perhaps for first graders or second graders, you might write one paragraph. But when you're writing a college application essay or an essay on a standardized test, you probably will have to write a 4 or 5 paragraph essay. A 1 paragraph response would be considered inadequate for that audience. In addition, audience determines your style, your figures of speech. You might use more similes, more metaphors, more personification with one audience than you would with another, because you know that those readers like a style that has more figures of speech, where the other audience perhaps likes a style that's more streamlined. Last, your audience also determines the tone, your attitude towards your material, whether you're positive, whether you're negative, whether you support it strongly or you don't. So your audience determines everything about the writing task: your topic, your word choice, your sentence length and variety, the length of your document, the figures of speech, and your tone. You cannot write anything until you've analyzed your audience and figured out their specific needs. Next, we mentioned at the beginning, your purpose for writing. Writers have only 4 main purposes: to explain, to persuade, to describe, and to narrate. Narrate means to tell a story. Let me give you some examples of those. To explain. When you explain, you show and you tell about a topic. We call that expository writing. Expository starts with EXP. So does explain, and that's an easy way to remember it. Number 2, to persuade. When you persuade, you are convincing people that your idea deserves serious consideration. Persuasion is also called argumentation. Number 3, to describe. When you describe in writing, you use the 5 senses to help your readers visualize or get a mental picture of what it is you're writing about. And the 4th kind is to narrate or to tell a story. In this case, what you're doing is you're entertaining. Writers can have more than one purpose, of course, and most kinds of writing do. For example, narration always has description in it because you can't write a narration or a story without description. A fable, for example, is a type of narration. It tells a story. It also has a lesson or a moral at the end. Nonetheless, even if you have 2 purposes, one of them is usually your primary purpose, your main reason for writing. So when you begin to brainstorm and think about your ideas, consider your purpose or your reason for writing this. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and explain the purpose of each of these topics. Choose from the following list. Is the purpose to narrate, to explain, to describe, or to persuade? Then come back. Here are the answers. My mother's herb garden. Well, probably you will describe the herb garden. You might name and talk about each plant. You might describe the oregano, the chives, the sage, the basil, and you would show through your writing what each specific herb looks like, what it smells like, how it grows, and how it's used. This particular topic lends itself very well for description because you can talk about each specific type of plant. Number 2, how to plant an herb garden. Well, the words how to tell you that you're going to explain. This will be a process analysis paper as you list the steps in order. For perhaps to plant an herb garden, you might first choose which herbs you're going to grow, then you might prepare the soil, then you would actually plant the herbs, then you would have to water them and fertilize them and weed them and so on. So you're doing step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. You're explaining the process. Number 3, why people should cook with herbs. The word why tells you this is a persuasive essay. Why should people cook with herbs? Well, maybe herbs give your food a lot of flavor without adding many calories. Perhaps herbs make your food look prettier because you can sprinkle them on top. So you would try to persuade your audience to use more herbs in their cooking by giving specific reasons why, as I just did with those 2 reasons. And number 4, the rabbit and other creatures in the herb garden. Well, this probably would be a story. You're going to narrate. You're going to tell about the rabbit who maybe got into your herb garden and started nibbling on certain things. And so to spite the rabbit, what you decided to do was to plant carrots around the edges. And the rabbit ate through one part of the carrots and then ate all the way through the garden and ate everything in its path. Or maybe you decided, why not? Let the rabbit have some food. And you went out and you saw the rabbit. And you would tell a story about saying to the rabbit, hey, rabbit, you can have what you want. Just leave me a certain amount of it. This could be humorous. This could be serious. This could be funny. This could be poignant. But it would be a story about a rabbit getting into your garden. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and explain the purpose of the passage in your study guide. It could be to narrate, to explain, to describe, or to persuade. Then come back. The purpose is to narrate, to tell a story. You can figure this out because the passage does indeed tell a story. It has characters, Lucy and Mark. It has a plot, a series of events related in order, and it has a setting. The writer has also created a conflict and suspense. The suspense is especially evident at the end of the passage. The mountain, it wasn't there before, Mark responded. Don't be a fool. Mountains don't rise up in 10 minutes, Lucy said. At that part, we see the suspense as we're wondering what's happening. So this is a narration or a story. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and explain the purpose of the passage in your study guide. The purpose could be to narrate, to explain, to describe, or to persuade. Then come back. The purpose of this particular passage is to explain. You can infer this because the text gives specific facts, details, and other information. For example, we have 1594 to 1599, continued as a principal actor and manager in the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and in 1599, he became part owner in the most prestigious public theatre in London, the Globe. From these facts, details, and examples, I can figure out that the writer wanted to explain a part of William Shakespeare's life. Now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and explain the purpose of the passage in your study guide. The purpose could be to narrate, to explain, to describe, or to persuade. Then come back. The purpose here is to describe. Remember, description is writing that appeals to the 5 senses. You can figure this out because the writer gives a great deal of detail, sensory detail, such as the heat of this long ride, which appeals to our sense of touch, our total lack of water appeals to our sense of taste, and our thirst became so oppressive, again, our sense of taste. You can see this in other details as well. For example, under our heavy loads, the sense of touch, the heat and the deep dust of the road, which is touch and sight, and water discolored with the soap the soldiers had used in washing, sight. So I've got a great deal of sensory detail, which tells me the writer is describing. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and explain the purpose of the passage in your study guide. The purpose could be to narrate, to explain, to describe, or to persuade. Then come back. The purpose here is to persuade. The writer is trying to convince the audience of his or her opinion. You can figure this out because the writer is arguing something. The writer believes that reading is the single most important activity that students can do. As a result, all students should have an hour of mandatory reading time every day, the writer believes. Now this is very controversial because not everybody would agree with it. Some people, for example, might say that math is far more important than reading. Others might say, and I would be one of them, that writing is as important, maybe even more important, than reading. Some people might argue that kids need an hour of physical education a day, that they shouldn't have to sit and read. They can do that in the evening. Maybe during the day they should go out and play. So it's a controversial topic that has different sides. The writer is trying to persuade, and you can figure it out because the issue has different sides. Now remember, most often writers combine their purposes. A narrative essay will very often have a great deal of description in it. A persuasive essay might open up with a brief narrative to set the scene. So I've sort of taken these apart so you can see them individually, but very often they are combined in writing. However, usually one specific purpose will predominate. Stories are stories. Descriptions are descriptions. Speeches that persuade are persuasive. Instructions seek to explain. So keep that primary purpose in mind every time you sit down to write. You will again work in some other information, but you'll have that primary purpose fixed in your head. Up to now, You've learned about your topic, your purpose, and your audience. 3 of the most important elements as you plan your writing. Now, let's actually start getting something down on paper. We call this brainstorming. It's an umbrella term for many different techniques that professional and student writers use as they get ready to really start drafting. Let's say that you have a normal class period. You've got about 45 minutes in which to write your essay. In that case, brainstorming should not take you more than perhaps 2 to 4 minutes. They're quick and they're easy techniques. All the methods that you're going to learn shouldn't take you more than perhaps 2 to 4 minutes. What I'd like you to do is try all these different methods. That way you'll see which ones work best for you. But you're going to find that perhaps on Tuesday one method works well and it doesn't work as well on Wednesday. Don't worry. In that case, just switch to a different method. And by juggling all these methods, you'll be able to always get started as you have to when you're faced with time constraints. If you do have some problems, we call that writer's block. We're going to talk about that in a subsequent lesson, and I'll show you ways to overcome writer's block as well. So let's start with the first technique. I call this listing ideas. It's exactly what it sounds like. You just make a list. It's a type of free association. What you do is number 1 to 5, 1 to 10, down the left-hand side of a sheet of paper. You're going to write as quickly as you can and just let your brain go into free association mode. Don't worry about spelling, don't worry about punctuation, don't worry about even writing the same thing twice. If you get stuck and you can't think of anything to write, just make loopies with your hand because that'll get your brain back started. For example, let's say you don't have a topic. So you want to now generate an idea for a topic. Try it. Number 1 to 10 down the left-hand side of a sheet of paper. Just the act of numbering it, by the way, gets you started. So now the paper is no longer blank. Here's my list. I wrote down genetic engineering, school uniforms, cell phones, the Industrial Revolution, instant messages, Hamlet, school cafeteria food, the War of 1812, immigration, and after-school jobs. As you can see, I did put my brain on autopilot, and I just came up with any idea that I could. Now, which topic would I choose? Well, remember, I'm going back to my audience and my purpose. Knowing my audience, which in this case is my teacher, I think I would choose cell phones because I know a lot about it. And I know my teacher would be very interested in it because we've been having some problems in school lately with cell phones. I think I could write a very good essay about the advantages, the good parts, and the disadvantages, the bad parts about cell phones. But cell phones is still a very broad topic, so I want to make it even narrower. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to brainstorm again, but this time I'm going to write only about cell phones. I want to see how many subtopics I can generate, that if I have enough to even write about the paper, because I may think I know more about cell phones than I do. Do it with me. Here's my list. Well, the first thing I thought of was cost, and then I thought of safety. Disruption in class has been a big issue, but they're very useful in emergencies. I thought about different brands and different features. I know they make a fashion statement. I thought about the size, too, because some of them are large and some of them are very small. Family plans, and I like those ringtones. Well, now I have enough ideas to get started. I certainly won't use all 10 of them because there's too much there. In the next installment of this series, you'll learn how to choose and how to organize your thoughts. Quick review. First brainstorming is listing, which is simply numbering 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 and writing as quickly as you can, getting down a lot of ideas. Our second method is called webbing. Some people call it clustering or mapping or even mind mapping. This is a more visual way of brainstorming ideas, and it works very, very well if you're a good spatial learner. And by that I mean if you're someone who likes sports or riding a bike, surfing, roller skating, but it works well for anybody. But if you're one of those kind of spatial learners, I think you'll find this method very well suited. You make a web by drawing a circle in the center of a sheet of paper. From that center circle, draw lines radiating out. Draw perhaps 5 or 6 lines. At the end of each of those lines, draw another circle. Here's what it looks like. Let's try it now. Make a web on school cafeteria food, which was another topic that we had on our brainstorming list. Take that center circle and write school cafeteria food right there. Then, as you web, put subtopics about school cafeteria food in each of those radiating circles. Here's what my web looked like. How does it compare to yours? Well, you'll see I wrote school cafeteria food right in the center of my web. And then on top I wrote limited food choices, poor and good nutrition. I wrote low cost, it is very convenient. I wrote portion size, they are a little small, and I tend to prefer fast food. Yours may be the same, yours may be different, but it doesn't matter. What matters is you've got some subtopics now, and you can decide if you have enough to write on or you want to try another topic in the center of your web. So let's review for a second. Webbing, also called mapping or clustering, is a visual way of brainstorming ideas. When you make a web, you draw a circle in the center of a sheet of paper, and then you draw lines radiating out from it. In those lines, at the end, you draw little circles and you put subtopics. And remember, this should take you no more than perhaps 2 to 4 minutes to do. Let's turn to our third way of brainstorming ideas. I call this charting. Charting is another visual method that you can use to generate ideas. You can make up any chart that you like. I'm going to tell you about a number of different charts, and I'm going to give them different names to make them easy for you to remember. The first kind we'll call a Venn diagram. It's especially helpful when you do a comparison-contrast essay. Remember, comparison is when you show how things are similar, and contrast is when you show how things are different. A Venn diagram shows 2 interlocking circles. It shows all the qualities of item 1 in the left-hand circle, all the qualities of item 2 in the right-hand circle, and how the 2 are the same in the center part of the diagram. Complete the following Venn diagram on the topic of fast foods versus home cooking. So now what I would like you to do is pause the program and try this yourself. Draw the Venn diagram, fill it in, and then come back. Take a look at my sample Venn diagram and compare it and contrast it to your own. On the left, I wrote about fast food. On the right, I wrote about home cooking. The left circle, I said that fast food tends to be quick and easy to prepare. I said it's filled with salt and fat. I said it's very fattening and I said it's not as nutritious as home cooking. The right circle, I said that home cooking usually takes longer to prepare. I said it tends not to be as high in salt and fat, it's not as fattening, and it tends to be more nutritious. In the center circle, I said they're similar because they're both inexpensive, they give you many choices, they're tasty, and they fill you up. The important thing here is not whether your charts match my charts, but rather you've generated sufficient detail to write your paper. So if yours doesn't match mine exactly, just make sure you've got at least 3 examples in each of your circles. Now let's turn to another kind of charting. This is called storyboard. The name tells you what it's used for. It's used for stories. It's like a comic strip. It's very, very useful because it shows the events of a story in chronological or time order. If you know anything about movie making, they call it pre-visualization because you're pre-visualizing or looking ahead. A storyboard is a series of boxes. The boxes are connected with arrows. The earliest item goes in the first box on the left. The last item goes in the furthest box on the right. You can draw a little picture or a scene or even an icon in each box, sort of like a comic strip, as I said earlier. Let's say, for example, you're writing about a recent family vacation. You're going to describe last summer's fishing trip that you took. You might create a storyboard like this. Take a look at these pictures. It shows us packing the car, driving up the river, catching the fish, I caught the big fish, and driving home. Let's try another one now. Suppose you were writing an essay in your history class about the prehistory of the United States Constitution. You've got to focus on how earlier events, documents, governments, and so on influenced the drafting of our own Constitution. You want to include at least 5 specific events, so you're going to draw 5 boxes. Now remember, storyboards go in chronological order from the first event to the last event. So you're going to start with the earliest documents and you're going to move on to the latest documents and events. What I'd like you to do now is pause the program and try this yourself. Draw the 5 boxes, fill in each document or event, and then come back. Here's my sample storyboard for this essay. You can see that I've chosen 5 of the events, documents, governments, etc., that some historians believe had an influence on the drafting of the United States Constitution. In the first box, I placed Greek democracy. Then I put the Roman Republic in the second box, then the Magna Carta, then the Enlightenment, and finally the Articles of Confederation in the last box. Of course, there are many different ways to fill in this kind of storyboard. You might have included, say, the Charter of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, or even the Declaration of Independence, so don't worry if your storyboard varies from mine. The important thing is to get specific events in each box in time order. And notice that for abstract ideas, a little sketch or icon and then the appropriate phrase does the trick nicely. A storyboard is really just a quick illustrated timeline that can help get your brainstorming juices flowing. Now let's take a look at another type of charting. This one is a 2-column chart. It's very useful when you're writing about 2 related people, places, things, or ideas. Let's say that you wanted to write an essay about whether fast food franchises should be allowed to serve and prepare meals in school. One of the nice things about charts is you can use the same topic or a variation on the topic, and you can develop it in different ways. So I'm taking a topic that I used earlier, giving it a little bit of a spin and showing you now how to use it in a 2-column chart to develop a slightly different essay. Would you now complete the following chart on the topic, should fast food franchises be allowed in schools? Put your pros, your advantages, on the left, and your disadvantages, your cons, on the right. What I'd like to ask you to do is please pause the program and try it yourself. Then come back. Here's my sample 2-column chart on the topic, should fast food franchises be allowed in schools? How does my chart compare to your chart? I have the advantages on the left and the disadvantages on the right. My first advantage is fast food franchises generate a lot of money for schools. Schools can use this money in many different ways, for example, for textbooks or school supplies. My disadvantage is the schools then lose their autonomy, that's their independence, because they're relying on outside funding sources. Going back to the left, another advantage, children like the taste of fast food, so they'll be more apt to eat their lunch. But a disadvantage is children don't get the vitamins and the nutrients that they need from fast food. Go back to the left. Big advantage is schools save a lot of money because they don't have to hire cooks and cleaners and other people to serve in the cafeteria. But the disadvantage is fast food is greatly contributing to the obesity epidemic among America's youth. Now I have enough to write my essay because I have 3 topics on one side and 3 topics on the other side. Fourth method is called free writing. Free writing is exactly what it sounds like. You simply just start writing. You don't do any planning. You let your brain roam. Absolutely, without any hesitation, write about whatever comes to your mind. Don't worry about your spelling, your punctuation, or your grammar. Just concentrate on getting your ideas down. Leave yourself about 2 minutes, then take a look at your free writing and see what ideas pop right out of that. If you get a little bit tense or nervous when you do this, turn off the computer monitor or close your eyes when you write. And then when you open them or you look back at the monitor, you'll see some ideas pop right out at you. Let's give it a try. Some people argue that students fail in schools because of dull subject matter, poor teaching, or inadequate families. Agree or disagree? So put your pen down, write on the paper, and just start writing. Give yourself 2 to 4 minutes. Here's what I wrote. Students don't wash out because of poor schools. They fail because of lack of effort on their own part. Learning isn't acquired by chance. It's a deliberate effort. You've got to come to class prepared with your books, your pens, and your notebooks. You've got to pay attention in class and really listen to the teacher, and you can't let your mind doze, you can't dream. You have to do your homework. You have to study hard. You can't spend all night watching TV or hanging out with your friends. You have to take control of your own learning. Schools can only do so much. Even the best schools can't help you if you don't put much effort in. Now, this is certainly not a finished essay. I don't like the tone. It comes across as sort of hectoring and lecturing, and it's a little bit stuffy. But I might pick out a couple of the ideas here that I like about not sleeping in class, about coming to class prepared, and take those ideas and use them as the basis of my essay. Let's talk about asking questions. It's our 5th method of brainstorming. With this brainstorming method, you ask questions. There are 6 of them. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. They're usually called the 5 W's and the H. This method forces you to approach a topic from several different vantage points. It helps you narrow your topic and focus your ideas. As a result, it's a very good method to use when you want to make sure you have the details that you need to write your paper. Let's try it now with a rather technical topic, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Down the left-hand side of your page, write who, what, when, where, why, and how. And then see how much detail you can fill in about these. Here's a sample response. How does it compare to yours? Who, JFK, assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. What, assassination of the 35th President of the United States. When, November 22nd, 1963 at 12:30 p.m. Where, Dallas, Texas, outside the school book depository. Why, Oswald was killed before he could explain, so we don't know. And how, with a rifle. Now, you probably can't answer all of these questions, but that's okay, because now you know you've got to go to a reference source to get the details to fill in the facts. So you might want to use an encyclopedia or an almanac or a reliable website. If you can't answer all of these questions, you don't have enough detail to use to write your essay. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and list the 5 methods of brainstorming. Then come back. Here are the answers. Number 1, listing. Number 2, webbing. Number 3, charting. Number 4, free writing. Number 5, asking questions. Don't worry if you didn't list them in this specific order. That doesn't matter. As long as you listed all 5 of them, that would be fine. If you missed some, go back through the program and review the parts that you didn't remember. Because what you're going to want to do is try all different methods of brainstorming. Sometimes one will work better in a specific situation than the other, as we discussed. So, for example, if you're taking a standardized test and you're feeling a lot of pressure, you might find that free writing works better for you. But maybe the next time you take a standardized test, listing works better for you. So you want to know all 5 methods so you can switch off, so you never get stuck and you don't sit there and think, oh my gosh, now what do I do? You'll always have something in that tool bag, and you can just reach in and take out one of these methods and try it. And if that particular method doesn't work, you can try another one. So again, review the program to make sure that you're familiar with all 5 methods. In this program, you've learned all about brainstorming. Using the 5 techniques will help you get started when you have an assignment, a general topic, or when you've got to come up with your own idea. Try all of these techniques to see which ones work best for you. Remember, consider your purpose, why you're writing, your audience, who you're writing for, and your topic as you brainstorm. Well, we've come to the end of our program. Thank you. I hope you found this instruction helpful and you've learned some things that you can use to take your written communication to the next level. Be sure to join us in the next program in Video Aided Instruction's Upgrade Your Writing series, Organizing Your Thoughts, where we'll review some important strategies and techniques that you can use to add logical flow and predictable structure to your writing. Thanks for watching.
When you're serious about learning an academic subject or scoring high in a test, there's just one name to know: Video Aided Instruction. We don't waste your time with goofy skits, corny jokes, or silly sing-alongs. We get right to the point. Real teaching by real teachers. Visit us online at videoaidedinstruction.com to learn more about our exciting line of educational programs. As we say here at Video Aided Instruction, press play to learn.
Do you want to earn better grades in school or boost your scores on standardized tests? Do you want to increase your fluency in English or improve your communication skills at work? Or do you simply want to relearn those forgotten grammar rules? Well, look no further. Video Aided Instructions English Grammar Series is a great resource for everyone, whether you're new to English or you've been speaking it for years. Our one-of-a-kind series can help you master even the most complicated grammar topics. Be sure to view the entire series: English grammar sentence structure, parts of speech, sentence complements, verbs, pronouns, agreement, modifiers, parallel structure, punctuation, and spelling and capitalization. So don't let mistakes in English grammar embarrass you or hold you back. Let video-aided instruction help you eliminate them from your speaking and writing forever. If you're getting ready to take your SAT, don't forget, your score can make or break your chances of getting into the college of your dreams. That's where Video-Aided Instructions SAT Series, a complete SAT course on DVD, can make all the difference. Our comprehensive SAT series will help you prepare thoroughly with insider strategies for making sense of tough reading passages and sentence completions, mastering the tricky rules of grammar, usage, and mechanics, crafting a well-written, high-scoring essay, unraveling those mind-boggling math problems, avoiding lengthy computations by using proven shortcuts, and much more. Get that all-important edge over the competition with SAT Critical Reading, SAT Writing, and SAT Math. After viewing these exceptional programs, you'll be able to take the stress out of SAT success and maximize your score.